Hello and welcome to another episode of Bible Answers in 5 Minutes. I'm your host Brad. And in today's episode we are going to be looking at a very interesting subject. We are going to be looking at Elijah and Moses. What do they have in common? Is it just the Mount of Transfiguration or is it other things as well? So with that said, let's get started. Okay, so like I said, we are going to be looking at the connections between Moses and Elijah. Now, most people understand that those were the two men who stood on the Mount of Transfiguration with Jesus, kind of Moses embodying the law, and Elijah kind of embodying the prophets, or so most scholars think. But let's take a look at some of those unusual connections. Now, the two most famous events in Moses' life are, of course, the burning bush and receiving the Ten Commandments, both of which happened on Mount Horeb, or Mount Sinai, depending on what you want to call it. It's the same place. You can see on the map kind of where most people agree that it is. And what most people don't realize is that Elijah was also on Mount Sinai. He was at Mount Horeb, probably one of the most defining moments of his life, when he went into the cave and he saw that God appeared in a still small voice. He was not in an earthquake. He was not in the windstorm or the fire. All of those large, loud natural disasters. He wasn't there. He was in the still small voice. It was an important lesson for Elijah in his ministry as well. Other things that they have in common, both were able to had fire called down. Of course, Elijah is probably the most famous of the two. When on Mount Carmel he challenged the prophets of Baal to a spiritual showdown, as it were. And also with Moses, back in Leviticus 9, after one occasion, fire came down from heaven onto the altar and took the evening sacrifice, and all of the people had kind of that same reaction of, fire just appearing out of nowhere, and they shouted for joy and awe and reverence, and they fell down. Both had successors, Joshua and Elisha. Now, in Hebrew, both of their meanings of their name are actually almost about the same. Now, this is probably the most fascinating of all. Now, you may recall that Moses, he was not allowed to enter the Promised Land because God gave him a command and he did not follow that command. So he was not allowed to enter the Promised Land. Only Joshua, Caleb, and the other youngest of the generation of Israel, after 40 years, was allowed to do that. But God did let him go up to Mount Nebo. Mount Nebo is a very high mountain in the area. You can see where it's highlighted there on the map. And the Jordan River, which is right next to Jericho there, he could look out throughout all the land and he could see the Promised Land, but he couldn't go in. And then the Bible says that Moses died. And you can kind of see an artistic rendering there on the left of Moses looking out over the horizon. If you go to Mount Nebo today, you can, on the right, that's what it actually looks like. You can see the Dead Sea and the plains of Moab. The other side of the Jordan River there is where Jericho would have been. Now, for Elijah, probably the most famous moment in his life, of course, is the chariot of fire. So when you actually read the chapter there in 2 Kings, there's actually, in between all of the dialogue, the author gives you a very clear map that Elijah took. It says that he was in Gilgal in verse 1 and 2, and then he went to Bethel. And from Bethel, in verse 4, it says that him and Elisha, they traveled to Jericho. And then in verse 7, it says that they crossed the Jordan River. It actually parted miraculously, like how the Red Sea did. So there's another thing they both have in common. They're both parting bodies of water. And as they cross the river, they're walking along the way. They don't stop, but suddenly the Spirit of God comes and takes Elijah away in a chariot of fire. Now, where was he heading? Was he heading to Mount Nebo? No, he went to the mountain of God. He went to Mount Horeb, the same as Moses did to encounter God. So if Elijah knew he was going to die, which the text clearly seems to say that he knew that he was going to be taken away, maybe he figured he should go to Mount Nebo, which is where Moses went to be taken away by God, as it were, as well. He never made it there, though, so this is only guessing, kind of speculation. But we do know that he wasn't, it came as a surprise to them, because it tells us very clearly in verse 11 that they were on the way walking, and that when the chariot of fire appeared, it separated the two of them, so they weren't just standing there waiting for it to happen. They were walking. They were still heading somewhere. So where was that? I mean, who knows? Maybe it was Mount Nebo. So there you go. Moses and Elijah, they have more in common than just meeting Jesus on the Mount of Transfiguration. I hope you found this informative. If you have any other questions about this topic or any other Bible-related subject, feel free to ask in the comment section below, and I will do my best to make a video and try to answer those questions. Otherwise, please remember to subscribe, like us, put us up on social media. I appreciate it all, guys. Have a great day, and God bless. See you next time.